Well, as more and more polygamists gathered in the Short Creek area, a group of the more prominent men organized and started taking charge in the community. The first to really be named or considered a leader in the area was a guy named John Y. Barlow. And Barlow seemed to have the vision that the community needed to organize even more beyond just having him kind of at the head and making the decisions. Now keep in mind, these people were mostly concerned with raising crops and taking care of their cattle and providing for their families. But by about 1913, Short Creek was organized into a community, and Short Creek was founded. The years passed by, and in 1932, Barlow and a group of his close friends became a group council leadership of the now formed and fully functional fundamentalist movement. Now, not only did they collaborate on religious kinds of things, but they also organized and started taking care of the civic duties and running the community from that perspective. The group organized and called themselves the Council of Friends. Now, I've heard some people say they called it the Council of Seven, but it included a couple of key people in that first group. With the organization of the Council of Friends made up of a number of guys. Number one, of course, John Barlow, Lauren C. Woolley, Leslie Broadbent, Charles Zitting, Joseph Musser, LeGrand Woolley, and a guy named Lewis Kelch started running the affairs of the community from a civic perspective and a religious perspective. Together, they considered themselves the governing board for all things, including their new church. Well, as time went on, consistent with about any cult that I've dealt with, there were a number of people who started to perceive that they had more authority than the leadership, and they began to proclaim their right to inspiration for themselves and for others. And the group went through this very experience where people started to break off and align with different leaders, and they started having disagreements even amongst themselves. Now, members of the community started choosing sides, started choosing new leaders, so to speak, and they started building independent little subgroups based on thought and ideology. These schisms that were happening resulted in the formation of multiple fundamentalist groups within the fundamentalist movement. And those fundamentalist groups still exist today. They included groups like the Apostolic United Brethren Group, the Kingston Group, and the group of our focus today, the FLDS. Now, some people who are close to the group's history claim that the FLDS group really wasn't officially named until about 1987. And that was a time period when the FLDS were officially named inside of a court document calling them the FLDS. Now, others disagree and say that the fundamentalists had that name immediately attached to them once they disenfranchised from the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith. I don't know which is true. There are stories supporting either side. But regardless, the FLDS belief was that plural marriage was here to stay, and that those who were faithful would continue to worship and perform those multiple marriages and create these incredibly large families, because that was the way to a true heavenly reward. John Barlow actually was selected to be the formal leader of the group of the FLDS, and he remained in that position for many, many years, up until 1949. When Barlow died, he was succeeded by Joseph Musser, who led the church until 1954. But it was a really critical time, especially that last year of his leadership, because this was a time when the FLDS history shows us that the entire community was raided by Arizona police officers and National Guardsmen who came into the community on July of 1953, arresting every adult in there except for, get it, 6 people. And those 6 were determined to not be polygamists and people associated with the thing. It became known as the Raid on Short Creek. And that was an incredibly tough time in polygamy history. And after the raid, the polygamists continued to live in Short Creek, but Short Creek was then renamed Colorado City. And that happened about 7 years after the raid. Now, if you go to my story map, you're going to find a lot of really cool stuff, but there's one link in there that actually is Warren Jeffs teaching children in the FLDS about that raid on Short Creek. And I'll tell you, I hope you'll go and listen to that, because he makes it clear that in his opinion, the state was nothing but damnable devils who were chasing after them. And I think you'll be interested. Plus, you get to hear his voice as he goes through things. But, well, just before Joseph Musser's death, he made it clear to the membership of the FLDS, and he made it clear that he was speaking for God, that he wanted a man named Rulon Allred to be the next leader of the FLDS. Now, this angered a bunch of people who were members of the FLDS community. And another revolt happened and schism occurred where there was a great division within the FLDS community, with some people choosing to side with Allred and others waiting to see who the next prophet or leader of the FLDS would be. Well, instead of taking Allred, the FLDS group chose Charles Zitting to be the next leader of the FLDS church. And that caused Allred and his group to take off and head out and do their own thing. In fact, angered, the Rulon Allred followers actually severed their ties, and they became known as the Apostolic United Brethren Group. And they moved north to another location to run their new church. Well, Charles Zitting served only a short time, but when Charles Zitting died, Leroy Johnson became the next leader of the FLDS, and he continued to reign in that position until 1986 when he died. And this is where a man named Willie Jessup comes into the picture. Now, Willie Jessup started as a very young man and provided security for the prophet or self-proclaimed prophet Johnson at the time. When Johnson died in 86, and a new prophet came in, or a new church leader named Rulon Jeffs, then Jessup was retained as the leader of the church's personal bodyguard. He continued to serve as bodyguard through Rulon Jeffs' leadership period of time, and also became the bodyguard for Warren Jeffs, who is the one that most of you know about. But in 1984, as Johnson aged and neared death, another schism was happening. And this resulted in another group being created of fundamentalists. And that group of fundamentalists became known as the Centennial Park Group. Now, this all happened because Johnson started preaching that God wanted him to be the only person to make decisions in the community, the only person with authority to make decisions, and the only person that was the last word. And this didn't sit well with the other men who were on these councils to provide leadership over the group historically and at that time. To assert his power, Johnson pressed on, and the division occurred, and the Centennial Park Group formed. And today, the Centennial Park Group still is managed by a group of men rather than a single leader. Now, one sits as the president of the group, and the one who makes the final decisions, I guess, but it's still run by a committee, so to speak. But when the Centennial Group was formed, this left the door wide open for a brand new leader to come in, and that leader happened to be Rulon Jeffs. And Jeffs assumed the position as the sole leader with the one-man rule, that he was the one who made decisions, and whatever he said happened. Now, as the sole decision maker in the community, again, there were people questioning this, and Rulon quickly assessed what was going on and he started getting rid of people that were going against him. He made this declaration also that entirely shocked the community. The declaration was that he was calling himself a prophet of God. Never before had any leader in the FLDS called themselves a prophet of God. And now Rulon Jeffs was declaring that he in fact was God's prophet. Well, when that happened, everybody was shocked. And again, the dissident fundamentalist groups who had walked away were saying this is proof that the FLDS are off base. The FLDS doubled down and said, no, it's proof that we are in charge. But as Rulon Jeffs' health declined, it started opening the door for his son Warren Jeffs to start taking a leadership role. And Warren Jeffs was quick to point out to the members of the community that God had instructed him that he was to be the next prophet when his father died. He even said that it was his father's will, although some people say that Rulon Jeffs was so confused and unable to communicate in those final days that they never really could verify that. Nonetheless, when Rulon Jeffs died in 2002, Warren Jeffs became the leader of the FLDS. Now you can read all about Warren Jeffs because there's a lot of history on him leading up to his arrest and now his life sentence in prison. But Warren Jeffs, when he came in, started immediately doing house cleaning, and he used his new title as prophet to assert his control. In fact, there was a guy named Winston Blackmore who was leading the FLDS membership in Canada, who started questioning what Warren Jeffs had to say. And like cutting off the head of a snake, Warren Jeffs excommunicated Blackmore from the church and got rid of any influence that he had. In fact, all of his leadership responsibility was gone, and I'm not sure, but if it's consistent with other men that Warren Jeffs threw out of the cult, he also probably took away his wives and his children. This resulted in a massive split in the Canadian FLDS community, and about 700 people from that community left the FLDS church and joined up with Blackmore. As time went on, Warren Jeffs' behavior became more and more bizarre. Now, you probably know most of this now, and I'm going to just leave this history of the FLDS leadership there as I pull into Hilldale and we start going around and looking at things. So stick around, because we're going to be covering a lot of cool stuff, and I'm going to be bringing in my friend Sam Zitting Weissam from Growing Up in Polygamy. And we're going to walk around and drive around the community looking at it from two perspectives. The perspective of a police officer who was trying to infiltrate and break apart that cult, and a kid who grew up in polygamy and believed the ideology hook, line, and sinker. That is, until he turned 18 and moved away and walked away from that faith system.